Hey guys, tonight we're going to stare a little too long at a painting that probably shouldn't exist. Not because it's cursed, though. You wouldn't be the first to think that, but because it might have predicted modern technology before the steam engine was even a twinkle in someone's eye. Imagine this. You walk through the echoing corridors of a grand, dusty gallery, the kind where you half expect to be judged by a portrait with two realistic eyes. The air is just a little too cold, the lights a little too soft. You're drawn to one canvas in particular. It's massive, regal, and just a touch unsettling. Two solemn men in rich velvet robes stare back at you, their faces human, their posture aristocratic. But what's between them? A table, numbers, a shrine, packed with objects that have no business existing in 1533. And yes, you can't help it. You lean closer. There's a globe that's strangely accurate, a lute with one broken string, a cylindrical object that looks suspiciously like a telescope, though that's not supposed to be invented for nearly a century, a device that's just one brushed hair away from resembling a digital clock. And you think, wait, what you probably won't survive this. Not if you're expecting a cozy bedtime story with soft lullabies and gentle fog. No, this one might tingle the back of your brain long after the lights go out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how this little storytelling thing connects all of us across oceans and time zones. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You approach the Ambassadors, a 1533 oil painting by Hans Holbein the Younger, housed today in the National Gallery, London. It's taller than you expect life-sized, and for a second, the figures almost breathe. They don't, of course. Probably Jean de Danteville and Georges de Selve were real people, French diplomats, both under 30 when this was painted. Their fine robes speak of wealth and culture, but you quickly notice the painting isn't really about them. It's about everything around them. It's like standing in a well-organized pawn shop run by Da Vinci himself. There's a celestial globe up top and a terrestrial globe below. Both are uncannily precise. Modern cartographers have pored over them, puzzled by how detailed the world map is. The globe even marks Newfoundland, which had only recently begun appearing in maps. And then there's the instruments and astrolabe, quadrants, sundials, and a torquetum which sounds like a spell, but is actually a very niche piece of tech used to measure celestial angles. And then there's that one object. It sits low, inconspicuous, just enough shadow hiding it to make you squint. A cylindrical tube, dark at one end, almost reflective at the other. Could it be a telescope? But that can't be right. Hans Lippershey wouldn't patent the first telescope until 1608. This painting is from 1533. Historians still argue whether Holbein painted an early prototype, imagined the device, or included something else entirely that we've now forgotten the use for. But it's hard to ignore the implication that someone might have been peeking at the stars long before the official timeline says so. The lighting in the painting is so precise, so directional, that some art experts claim Holbein might have used optics himself to trace or model his work, there's a theory dismissed by many, adored by a few, that artists of the Renaissance had access to more advanced optical tools than we commonly believe, that the clarity and photographic realism of portraits like this one weren't just talent, but tech. You reach a hand out carefully. Of course, don't worry, you're not actually in the gallery, but your mind is tracing the edge of the lute's curved body. A string is snapped. Odd. Right, everything else is so pristine. Some believe it's symbolic disharmony in an otherwise perfect world. Others wonder if it's a clue, a code. One theory suggests that if you recreate the musical notes from the frets and broken string, you get an old hymn or a cipher. This painting is a nesting doll of nerdiness. The more you look, the more it reveals. The floor beneath the figures is a black and white pattern copied directly from Westminster Abbey. The two-tier table echoes altars from Catholic chapels, suggesting a spiritual layer to this matrix of instruments. There are hints of hidden messages tucked in book spines, string arrangements, even the folds of velvet. Then you spot it right at the center. Between the two men, at first, it looks like a smudge, a mistake. You squint, then walk a few paces to the right. Still nothing. But when you slide to the left, a skull, distorted, elongated, impossibly stretched across the canvas. A trick of perspective. Holbein embedded an anamorphic image, a visual illusion where the image only resolves from a specific angle. It's a memento mori, a reminder of death shoved right into the viewer's path. You can't unsee it now. And suddenly, the tech, the grandeur, the opulence, it all feels more fragile, temporary. And just as your mind starts to wrap around this detail, your footstep echoes, not in the real world, but in the painted one. You imagine it the quiet shuffling of boots on a tailed church floor, the soft clicking of clock gears, a candle sputtering. For a moment, you feel like you've stepped behind the canvas into the world Holbein captured. One fringe theory, that the painting isn't just a portrait, but a coded map to lost inventions, like a 16th century IKEA instruction sheet for forgotten machines. You shake your head. Surely not. But then again, that tube, that globe, that skull, they weren't accidents. You take one last look at the figures. They don't blink. But if they did, you get the feeling they'd smirk. And you haven't even gotten to the weird part yet. You step closer, not physically now, but mentally, like falling through a rabbit hole made of oil paint and Renaissance intrigue. The men in the painting, Jean de Dinteville and Georges de Selve, don't speak. They don't need to. Their clothes, their expressions, and especially the items they've chosen to display. All of it is screaming a kind of coded message that doesn't need a decoder ring, just time. Let's start with the velvet. Jean, on the left, wears this dark green robe that practically glows. Folds and shadows so detailed you swear you could reach out and feel the weight of it. His chain glints thick, gold, slightly excessive. The man was a landowner and ambassador, but he's also clearly showing off. Georges, on the right, is a bit more somber in black robes, a bishop's cap perched neatly on his head. He's the thinker, the churchman, the quieter one, though. Don't assume he's dull. Between the two of them, they've stacked the table like it's an early access science fair booth. Here's the thing, the table is not some boring still life. It's a declaration, an Instagram feed of 1533. The top shelf holds scientific tools, a quadrant for measuring altitude, a torquetum for converting celestial coordinates, sundials galore, and that stunning celestial globe etched with constellations as if the heavens themselves had signed the guest book. And yet, none of it is casually placed. The angles are precise, aligned. If you're into conspiracy boards, this table layout would be your Super Bowl. Then there's the lower shelf. Books, of course, but not just any books. One is open to a hymn book, which naturally leads some scholars to wax poetic about spiritual balance in an age of exploration and doubt. Another is a math book by Peter Apian, a guy who was basically the Renaissance version of Bill Nye. There's a lute, yes, but also a pair of flutes and a case tucked just out of reach, as if daring you to open it and reveal something secret. But the more you look, the more it feels familiar. Too familiar, like you've seen these items before, not in a dusty museum, but on your own desk. Globe's GPS, quadrants satellite mapping, sundials, your Apple Watch's ancestors. That celestial globe might as well be Google's sky in 3D. Even the lute, its music theory wrapped in mahogany. The backbone of everything from Bach to Beyoncé. The parallels make your skin prickle. You lean into the lute. The broken string keeps haunting you. One scholar suggested it's a metaphor for political dissonance between church and state. Another thinks Holbein was just mad at his assistant for over-tightening it. But then someone found that the specific string, if reconstructed, creates a frequency matching a tuning standard not officially adopted until centuries later. Weird? Yes. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe Holbein was hearing things the rest of us hadn't caught up to yet. And let's not forget the fashion. Even their clothes are encoded. Jean's elaborate embroidery includes symbols for wealth. Yes, but also miniature astrological signs. George's robes. They fold in a pattern that some viewers claim mimics a catenary curve, a shape now used in engineering for bridges and suspension cables. You can't unsee it. Once you spot the geometry in the folds, it's like the fabric is whispering calculus. Here's your historical fact of the night Holbein painted this during Henry VIII's reign. Just as England was tearing itself away from the Catholic Church, tensions were high, science was clashing with dogma, and yet here's a painting that calmly, coolly assembles the universe on a table like it's no big deal. Now, for the quirky twist, someone once tried to 3D model the table setup using only the objects in the painting. They assumed it would be symmetrical, tidy, but it wasn't. The models kept tipping, unbalancing until one researcher realized Holbein painted everything with a 3% slant, not visible to the naked eye, but enough to subtly shift your perspective, almost like he wanted you to feel slightly off-kilter. And here's where the scholars start squabbling, like it's Thanksgiving dinner. Historians still argue whether Holbein placed the objects to create a philosophical argument, or if he simply recreated what the men owned. Was it a snapshot or a statement? Some believe the painting is Holbein's way of saying science and faith can coexist, each man representing one side of the human spirit. Others think it's a warning that obsession with knowledge can't save you from death. Remember that creepy skull Yeah, it's still watching, but even as they debate, the painting just sits there, patient, silent, smarter than all of us. You feel a flicker of something now, not fear. Exactly. But that quiet awe that happens when art steps out of its frame and pokes at your neurons, like when you're in a cathedral and realize the floor plan forms a cross, or when you read a poem that predicts your exact mood, because Holbein didn't just paint a portrait, he painted a moment, a manifesto, a microcosm of everything Europe was about to become, and maybe a hint of what the world is still becoming. And as you mentally walk your way around the table again, one last object catches your eye, tucked to the side, almost hidden beneath the edge of a book, is a strange metallic tool, too small to be a compass, too sharp to be decorative. You squint at it. Some claim it's a drawing stylus. Others think it's a mechanical pointer, an early proto-calculator of sorts. One wild fringe theory suggests it's an early gyroscope, an internal stabilizer used today in everything from spacecraft to your phone's orientation sensor. Of course, there's zero proof, just imagination, angles, and the tiniest sliver of metallic gleam under the brushstrokes. But something about it makes you lean in again, just a hair closer, and from this new angle, the skull's position shifts, subtly, creepily. So do the eyes of the two men. No, they didn't just move. Right. You shift your weight instinctively, blinking hard because for a second, it really did seem like their eyes moved. Not a blink, not a twitch, just the barest suggestion of awareness, like they've noticed you noticing. You tell yourself it's the lighting, maybe a trick of your own tired eyes, but something about the ambassadors doesn't let you go that easily. Your gaze falls once again to the smudge at the bottom of the canvas, elongated, ghostly, out of place, until you step sideways, just a foot or two. Then it clicks into focus. A skull, not just any skull, either. A perfectly distorted one, stretched and warped, so it only becomes legible from a severe diagonal angle. Holbein used a technique called anamorphosis, a kind of visual encryption where the image hides in plain sight, unless you're in the exact right position. Think of it as 16th century augmented reality, except no goggles, just geometry. And it hits you this isn't decoration. It's a warning, a slow, sneaky whisper woven into the elegance of instruments and silks. All this knowledge, wealth, music, math, it ends here. In bone, in death, memento mori, they called it, a reminder you will die. The painting forces you to hold two truths at once, the beauty and the void, the discovery and the decay. You feel it now, that cold finger on the back of your neck, the way the skull floats like a glitch in the matrix, like a reminder baked into code. You try to look away, but your mind's already unraveling the strangeness, because this isn't just symbolic. This skull doesn't sit in a corner. It's centered, dominant. It runs diagonally through the entire painting, like an invisible sword through space and time. Some art historians think Holbein did this to literally separate life and death. The two men are alive, wealthy, engaged with the world, but slice through the illusion, and death runs right through the middle. It's almost surgical, but others suggest something deeper, something darker. Holbein, they argue, wasn't just sending a spiritual message, he was playing with dimensionality. He was toying with the idea that perception itself is flawed. That reality changes based on where you stand. Sound familiar, yeah? Sounds an awful lot like quantum theory, Schrodinger's brushstroke, if you will. Now, that's not to say Holbein was secretly scribbling equations about particle wave duality in the margins of his sketchbook, but he was fundamentally challenging how people see. He used mathematics and optics not just to record the worlds, but to bend it, to trick it, to laugh in its face. Let's sprinkle in a historical nugget. Here Holbein had close connections to thinkers like Erasmus and Thomas More. These were men who lived in books the way fish live in water. Philosophers who delighted in turning certainties inside out. One of them, More, wrote Utopia, a book that imagined a radically different society with eerie prescience, a world built on logic and structure, but shadowed by authoritarian undertones. Sounds a bit familiar. And then there's the lesser-known detail Holbein likely spent time in the workshops of craftsmen and engineers. He wasn't just an artist, he was a technician. He built perspective machines, used grids and optics. He didn't just paint like a camera, he practically built the camera before it had a name. Here's your quirky detail of the night Holbein once painted a miniature so detailed. It was said to include the glint of a tear. It was smaller than your palm. Yet modern scanners have shown micro brushstrokes that are only visible under high-powered lenses, layers so fine. They defy what human eyes should have been capable of creating unaided. Either he had phenomenal eyesight or a little help, which brings us back to that skull. Some researchers believe Holbein's use of anamorphosis wasn't just for dramatic flair. It may have been inspired by camera obscura experiments. This is the device that projects light through a pinhole to cast a live image on the opposite wall. Da Vinci sketched it. Artists used it to trace life. And if Holbein used one, then he wasn't just painting death. He was projecting it, manipulating reality, bit by bit, through a lens. One theory even goes so far as to suggest the skull represents not death, but time travel. That by shifting your perspective, you're stepping between two planes, the visible and the hidden, the living and the dead, the now and the then. And here's where we step off the scholarly cliff for a moment. In 2003, a physics professor, yes, really gave a talk at a fringe symposium about how Holbein's painting might represent the earliest visual metaphor for parallel dimensions. His argument: the warped skull exists in a space that overlaps, but doesn't touch the main scene like an interdimensional glitch, and you only see it if you're looking from a liminal angle. Most laughed it off. Fringe. Sure, but the idea stuck, because if the Renaissance was about rebirth, then maybe Holbein was hinting at something even deeper. That reality is layered, that the human eye, so easy to deceive, might never see the full picture unless you move, and that's where things get personal. You think about how you see your own world. Flat, straight on, no tilt. What are you missing? Just because you're not standing at the right angle. The skull grins back, not maliciously, just knowingly. You step away again, trying to shake the chill. But now the whole painting feels different. The instruments aren't just antiques. They're interfaces. The books aren't relics, they're code. Even the cracked floor tiles seem to hold alignment, as if they're waiting for the right frequency to hum. And right before you mentally back away, a tiny detail catches your eye. In the reflection of a metal instrument, so faint you'd miss it, Unless you were already half haunted, you see a dot, just a shimmer, a pinprick of white. Some think it's a flaw in the paint. Others say it's intentional. A light source not matching any others. A second sun, a spark. Or maybe, just maybe, the ghost of a lens. But Holbein never explained. He never wrote notes. And the skull, well, it's still looking. You breathe in slowly, trying to reset. But something's shifted. Like the air in the room has thickened. You're not just looking at a painting anymore. You're inside a system, an arrangement of symbols, clues, and gentle cosmic sarcasm. The two men remain still, but now you feel them measuring you too, as though your own place in the scene is up for debate. The geometry continues to gnaw at your brain. Take the floor beneath their feet. Simple black and white tiles. Right. You've seen this kind of pattern in old churches, subway stations, or, if you're unlucky, a 1990s diner. But zoom in. Metaphorically, the tiles don't just create space, they suggest it. They converge with impossible precision toward a distant vanishing point. Mathematically perfect, optically unsettling. And here's a fun fact. The floor's pattern is nearly identical to the Cosmati pavement inside Westminster Abbey, used only for royal coronations. A floor designed to map celestial time using geometric ratios from ancient Pythagorean models. Yeah, that kind of floor. What's it doing in a supposedly secular portrait? Historians still argue whether Holbein intended to invoke sacred geometry or whether he simply liked the look. But the precision suggests intent, every tile a tick of some invisible clock. And speaking of clocks, let's talk about the instruments again. That sundial, it's not set to the time of the sitting. In fact, none of the devices agree with each other. One clock reads early morning, another late afternoon, a third indicates the spring equinox. It's like a scrambled code. One scholar even described the painting as a conversation in instruments, each object responding to another in a kind of silent algorithm. They don't track time, they question it. But it's the globe that really pulls you back in. Sitting slightly tilted, its continents are recognizable, yet subtly wrong. Not inaccurate, just skewed like an alternate version of Earth, with shorelines almost but not quite where they should be. Some claim Holbein used a model based on the latest Portuguese maps. Others whisper about lost knowledge, ancient maps scrubbed from history. But the real twist? There's a thin scratch and etched near the top of the globe, faint but deliberate, a line that doesn't belong. It runs across the ocean like a scar, connecting nothing. But when measured, it matches the trajectory of a modern satellite orbit. Yeah, that's not unnerving at all. Let's reel it in with a human moment. Imagine Holbein sitting in his studio, candle flickering, fingers stained with pigment. He leans over the canvas, not just painting but plotting. You wonder what he's thinking. Is he amused? Nervous, giddy? Did he laugh to himself when the skull finally snapped into focus from the side? Did he smirk, knowing it might confuse viewers for centuries? And maybe, just maybe, he was lonely. Think about it. Surrounded by men of power and intellect, but himself forever the outsider, the observer, the guy behind the brush. He knew secrets of math, light, form, but he wasn't allowed to be part of the game. So maybe this painting was his rebellion, his quiet way of saying, I see more than you think. Here's your offbeat tidbit. Some believe Holbein encoded his own face into the curvature of one of the globes stretched, just like the skull, but traceable if you rotate the map digitally and adjust for distortion, a self-portrait hidden in latitude. If true, it would make the ambassadors the first known example of a digital Easter egg 4 centuries early. You step back again, mentally measuring the space between each object. Everything's connected, but not obviously. The math book's page aligns perfectly with the edge of a sundial. The lute's peg mirrors the angle of a divider. The fabric on Jean's sleeve folds in an arc that echoes the horizon line on the celestial globe. The entire painting is a circuit board made of oil and wood. And then you see it, a barely there shimmer in the upper left corner part of the curtain. At first, it's just a wrinkle, a crease in green velvet, but then the shape emerges. It's a symbol no, a diagram, faint as breath on glass, a triangle inscribed with a spiral, a Fibonacci spiral in the 1500s. The Fibonacci sequence was still fringe math, useful in botany and architecture, sure, but it wasn't pop science. Yet here it is, tucked in the drapery, a secret code hidden in fabric folds. That's when your brain does a little cartwheel, because Fibonacci spirals are everywhere now. Shells, galaxies, hurricanes, pine cones, yes, but also camera lenses, neural networks, microchips, tech logos, the basic shape of so much of our modern life. So what's it doing in a curtain in 1533? Some claim it's a nod to divine proportion, God's math. Others suggest Holbein might have been influenced by Da Vinci's sketches, passed quietly through humanist circles, but a fringe group, those ever-charming iconoclasts, think it's proof of predictive modeling, that Holbein either intuited or found patterns that would only make sense centuries later. And this is where it gets goosebumpy, because once you see that spiral, you start to see it everywhere in the painting, in the curve of the lute, in the arc of the celestial rings, even in the positioning of the skull. A mathematician once overlaid a golden ratio grid onto the image and found that key intersections aligned exactly with the eyes, the globe's center, and the tip of a compass. You tell yourself it's coincidence, but your heart disagrees, and just when you think you've had enough, your eyes drift to the upper shelf again. There's a small cylindrical object beside the quadrant. Most viewers assume it's just a case, maybe for instruments, but one researcher noticed its metal end is reflective mirrored, almost, and when modeled in 3D and unwrapped, it shows a warped reflection of a shape that doesn't appear anywhere else in the painting. A box, a sleek, rectangular box, no adornments, just shape. You laugh, nervously. It's not a phone. Of course it's not. Right. But in that moment, staring at that reflected ghost of an object, you feel like you're being asked a question, not by the painting, by Holbein. What do you think you're seeing? And more importantly, what do you think he saw? You're not sure how long you've been staring. The painting isn't just a painting anymore. It's a trapdoor, a window, a quiet dare, like it's testing how much you'll notice before your rational mind drags you back to the safe harbor of coincidence. But you're too far now. The symbols swirl, spiral, stretch. Every glance reveals another thread, and your thoughts are tangled like headphone wires left in a jacket pocket since 2012. You blink, And then your focus returns to the two men. Jean de Denteville, dressed in rich velvets, leans on a ceremonial sword. Georges de Selve, the bishop, robed in fur-trimmed black. They're not just posing, they're holding a position. And suddenly, it hits you this is a snapshot, not of two men, but of balance, duality, secular and sacred, body and mind, sword and book, earth and heaven. Yeah, sounds like a stretch. But then you look at their eyes. Jean's gaze meets yours head on, defiant, almost cocky, the kind of look someone gives right before clicking buy on a very expensive mistake. Georges, though he's contemplative, quiet, eyes downcast, almost sad. And then you realize they're not looking at the same thing. One sees the world as it is. The other sees the world as it might be. Together, they form a perfect metaphor for human progress. One foot in reason, one in ambition. And this is where the modern weirdness slips in again. Because someone, years ago, decided to digitally map the painting using heat-detecting software not for temperature, but for focus. They wanted to find where viewers' eyes land most frequently. You'd think it would be the men's faces, or the big globe, or, the giant skull, but the highest heat signature, a blank spot. Between them, just empty space, except it's not. Zoomed in, enhanced, and digitally filtered. This area shows the faintest touch of pigment and erased shape. Triangular, tapered at one end. It looks like a stylus, the kind you'd use on a touchscreen. Historians still argue whether Holbein painted something there and later removed it, or whether the pigment is just residue from layering. But fringe theorists? Oh, they had a field day. Some say it was a future object, a concept Holbein saw in a dream. Maybe others claim he painted an item no one recognized at the time, so it was wiped out by later restorers to preserve historical accuracy. And here's the kicker. Old inventories of the painting don't mention the skull. Let that settle. The most iconic feature of the ambassadors, a literal distorted memento mori dominating the canvas, isn't recorded until centuries later. Some suggest it was added after Holbein's death, maybe by a follower or an ambitious restorer, but others claim the skull was always there, just not visible to earlier viewers due to environmental damage, aging varnish, or just misunderstanding, a trick of perspective. Remember, you only see it when you move, and you're starting to suspect that's the whole point of this thing. Let's step back from the theorizing for a sec. You're still you, still listening, still curled somewhere safe, while your brain strolls through a 16th century mind maze. But think about your own day. How often did you look at something straight on your phone screen, your computer, your mirror, and how often did you tilt your head, look slantwise? That's what Holbein demands. Lateral thinking, shifting your vantage point, even if it means seeing something uncomfortable, like death, or time, or a reflection of a world you don't recognize, because it hasn't happened yet. Let's drop in our fringe tidbit for tonight. In 1974, a Swiss engineer obsessed with Holbein's geometry published a now-lost paper claiming that the painting's grid alignment, measured using high-resolution scans, matches the mathematical parameters used in early microchip architecture. Same ratios, same angular spacing. He suggested that Holbein anticipated the circuit, long before electricity was harnessed. The paper was dismissed, obviously, but it made its way into internet legend, where late-night forums still call the ambassadors the Renaissance motherboard. Too much? Maybe. But what if the painting isn't just a record of its time, but a message to ours? Here's something that often gets ignored. Holbein died young, mid-40s, no fanfare, no long goodbye, and some of his notes, his early sketches and plans, went missing after his death. Gone, vanished from history, and yet his most complex, most layered work remains, almost untouched, which raises a big, sleepy eyebrow, because when most masterpieces of this scale are studied, poked, prodded, and slowly worn down by conservation and cleaning, this one remains oddly intact, almost like it's being preserved, like someone's making sure it stays ready. And then there's the odd provenance. After its initial home in a French noble estate, the painting vanishes from the record for a generation. When it reappears, it's in England owned privately, quietly passed down. It doesn't hit public display until the 20th century. That's nearly 400 years of quiet, almost like it was waiting. And now here you are, watching it, listening to its story, picking apart each brushstroke like it's code. You step closer. Again, in your mind, picture your hand reaching out not to touch, just to feel the heat. But of course, there is none, just layers of paint, darkened with age. Yet it feels electric, like standing next to a server farm, like pressing your ear to an old radio and catching a frequency not meant for you. Because what if this isn't just about a skull, or instruments, or perspective? What if it's a transmission, not from another world, but from another time? Not a warning, but an invitation to see more, to question harder, to move just a little to the side. You lean into the silence between objects. It's uncanny how quiet a painting can be when it's busy screaming at you in symbols. You're not sure if you're deciphering it or if it's deciphering you. But here's the part that really starts to mess with your sense of time as you go deeper. The painting starts to feel contemporary. And that's not a poetic metaphor. We're talking actual modern concepts rendered centuries early. Let's start with a shape. It's hiding in plain sight, the divider on the top shelf, the kind used to measure distances on a globe. Except Holbein has painted it open at a strange, slightly illogical angle. Not the kind you'd use for precise measuring, more like an antenna, pointed not at the objects, but into space between them. It draws your eye upward, away, toward something else, and that something else might just be the green curtain. Remember the curtain, draped lazily in the background? It's not just scenery, it's a boundary, a border, a velvet firewall. And here's where things get weird again, because recent spectral analysis, yes, they scan paintings now, like CTs for ghosts, found pigment irregularities behind the curtain folds, as if Holbein painted something beneath the curtain, then veiled it. And behind that veil, faint outlines suggest a mechanism, gears, levers, a vertical shaft of some sort, maybe even a tube. Art historians think it might have been a celestial sphere, or a Roman device for modeling planetary motion. But amateur engineers online have another theory. The shape's geometry is nearly identical to a 20th century gyroscope. You rub your eyes. This can't be right, but it keeps happening. Symbols from this painting keep echoing in our modern toolkit. The segmented globe, with longitudinal lines, mirrors Earth's telecommunications grids. The quadrant, same structure as an inclinometer used in aircraft. Even the lute, with its tensioned strings stretched across a hollow chamber, has been compared to frequency resonance chambers in early wireless radios. Coincidence, possibly, but at some point, too many coincidences start to feel like blueprints. Let's drop in our mainstream historical fact during the 1530s. Europe was in the throes of what you might call an analog data revolution. Printing presses were exploding in popularity. Maps were being updated at warp speed for the 16th century, and mathematical tools were being refined to explore not just Earth, but the heavens. Holbein had access to these innovations through humanist circles in Basel and London circles that prized hidden knowledge, sacred geometry, and yes, experimental models of time. But they didn't call it technology. They called it philosophy. So maybe this painting is philosophy. In its most dangerous form, a visual argument for knowledge that stretches beyond its era. Now, here's where you feel that twist in your gut again. Because when you analyze the dimensions of the painting, not just visually, but spatially, the depth of field behaves like early 3D layering. Foreground skull, midground figures and instruments, background curtain and void. Not uncommon for Renaissance art, sure, but when you map it using modern software, it translates into Z-depth, the same spatial axis used in VR rendering. It's a painting that behaves like a render. And someone online, of course, it was Reddit, took it a step further. They rebuilt the scene in Unity, dropped in lighting conditions based on 1533 London daylight, and discovered something uncanny when the digital sun hits the lute's strings at precisely the right angle. It projects a shadow shaped exactly like the golden spiral we mentioned earlier. That can't be chance. And yet, historians still argue whether Holbein was a pioneer of this kind of spatial modeling, or just a gifted realist with a flair for the weird. Some call him a genius of scientific seeing. Others think he was simply showing off his sponsor's wealth. And both might be true, because here's the thing about artists: they feel more than they can explain. And sometimes, what they feel gets poured into paint before language catches up. So maybe Holbein felt something coming, like the pressure change before a storm, like the shiver you get when you walk into a room and know someone was just there. Let's get quirky again. One Renaissance folio, connected loosely to Holbein's circle, contains a sketch of a man seated beside a cube. On the cube is written, in Latin and Tempus, say frangit time breaks itself. Below, there's a small drawing of a bird inside a glass cylinder. What's strange? The drawing is almost identical to a vacuum tube used in analog computers. It predates any known electrical experiment by 300 years. Maybe it's nonsense, or maybe it's a shadow of knowledge lost, rediscovered, and lost again. A cosmic game of telephone where the message only gets through if you squint sideways, like a skull in a painting, viewed from the corner of your eye. And here comes the emotional gut punch. Because if this painting is a message, or even a question, then it's not just for your brain. It's for your fear, your curiosity, that feeling you get when the world shifts half a degree and suddenly nothing feels solid. The same feeling you might have had as a kid, realizing your toys weren't just plastic, they were designed. by someone, somewhere. For you, this painting feels like that. You lean closer to the green curtain again. Not physically, just mentally. You trace the folds. You follow the shadows. You imagine peeling it back. And in that moment, for just half a breath, you think you see movement. Not from the paint, from behind the paint. As if the world inside that wooden frame isn't frozen. As if it's waiting. For what? That's the cliffhanger, isn't it? Maybe for someone to finally ask the right question. Maybe for the right kind of storm. Or maybe, just maybe, for technology to catch up to whatever Holbein saw flickering on the edge of his imagination. A flicker we've only now started to recognize. You're no longer just looking at a painting. Now it's more like standing in front of a mirror, but instead of your reflection, you're seeing the circuitry of history blinking faintly beneath the lacquer. You can't unsee it. The illusion of stillness is broken. The ambassador's hums like a machine left running in the dark. And yet, it also feels like a shrine. Two men, frozen in Renaissance velvet, flanked by objects so precise they practically glint. You imagine reaching out, lifting the lute, tapping the quadrant. You imagine them reacting, Jean raising an eyebrow, Georges murmuring something in Latin you don't quite catch. And through it all, the skull hovers, always just at the edge of sight. You still haven't figured it out. That's the point. But now it's time to follow a stranger thread, the shadow of surveillance. Yeah, you didn't see that coming, did you? So here's the deal. In 2011, a small team of digital archaeologists, yep, that's a thing, scanned the painting using reflectance transformation, imaging RTI. It enhances surface variations invisible to the naked eye. They weren't looking for secrets, just texture. What they found was unsettling. Tiny scratch marks in the lower left corner, not from where, not random. They follow a grid, a 5x5 matrix of shallow grooves, invisible under normal lighting. One art historian, sipping coffee during a panel Q&A, joked looks like a QR code. Everyone laughed, but someone ran with the idea. And here's where it gets even weirder. A hobbyist coder recreated the scratch grid and ran it through a QR code generator. No hits. But when she adjusted for the distortion of the canvas warp over time, stretched it mathematically, she got a result. A broken string of binary data, too corrupted to decode properly. But one phrase popped out, fragmentary and chilling. Observed through silence. Historians, predictably, dismissed it as noise, matrixing, apophenia, the human brain trying to find meaning in randomness. But you're not so sure anymore, because the more you stare, the more this painting feels like it's watching you. Let's anchor in a mainstream historical fact to keep from floating off into full conspiracy during the Tudor period. Coded language was everywhere. Cryptography was evolving rapidly, especially in courts where alliances turned on whispers. Even Queen Elizabeth had ciphers developed for her personal letters. Holbein, working for those very circles, would have been steeped in secrecy, but still embedding a surveillance message in a painting. It's either absurd or incredibly clever. Now lean into this fringe tidbit. A 2007 academic thesis claimed that the spacing of the floor tiles beneath the ambassadors follows a Fibonacci pattern not consistent with the rest of the geometry. The suggestion: the floor is a stage meant to visually vibrate a low-res simulation grid. That same floor, when digitally mapped, has been compared to the layout of early computer vision test patterns, stuff used to train cameras to distinguish depth. There's even a whisper, unconfirmed, that a military optics lab tested Holbein's painting and claimed the tile design tricked depth sensors into misreading their focus, like the painting wants to be misread, which begs the question, what's it hiding behind the misdirection? Let's talk about the painting's aura. It sounds esoteric, but stay with it. In spiritual traditions, an aura is the energy field around a person or object. But in tech, it's the ambient data, those little metadata shadows that follow a digital file. The who, what, when, where, and why of its creation. And Holbein's painting has metadata, in the analog sense, because its materials oak panel, pigments, even the gesso beneath have been chemically dated and analyzed, and a strange anomaly shows up in the red ochre used for Jean's sleeve. It contains trace elements not found in other known samples from the time. Not toxic, not faked, just unknown. One theory: contamination from volcanic ash carried on trade winds from the New World. Another pigment recipe lost to time. But the most delicious theory: a synthetic compound. A red not invented until 1895, somehow showing up 360 years early. Historians still argue whether it's a lab error, a fluke of preservation, or something stranger. You just get that tingle again. The painting glows like it knows something you don't. And here's a moment of emotional stillness. Picture Holbein at work, alone, candlelight flickering, the studio heavy with turpentine and old wood. He leans in, brush poised, and pauses not because he's unsure, but because he knows this moment matters. One flick of the brush, and a shadow will fall exactly where it must. And somewhere in that shadow, he hides a message, not for his patron, not for his time, but for someone like you. Centuries later, head tilted, eyes narrowed, questioning everything. And that's what gives you goosebumps, not the skull, not the instruments, not even the phantom QR grid, but the intention. This thing wasn't made to just be looked at. It was designed to unfold, like a pop-up book for the extremely patient. So now, you lean back, let your thoughts drift. You picture the 16th century world plague carts and market cries, candle smoke and salt tang in the Thames wind. Then fast forward through revolutions, electricity, silicon, screens, satellites, until here you are, holding a supercomputer in your palm, scrolling through centuries of information, and somehow, Holbein still surprises you, still one step ahead, and just when you think you've seen it all, your gaze drifts toward the edge of the frame. That's when you notice it. Something no one really talks about. The faint, barely perceptible line, like a seam running vertically behind the green curtain. Not part of the curtain. Behind it, the suggestion of a door, a hinge, a passageway. It's probably nothing, just a crack in the wood, or a brushstroke that aged strangely. Probably. But part of you wonders if you could reach through, just past that velvet barrier. What would you find? A laboratory, a void, another painting. Or maybe just a mirror. One that reflects not who you are, but what you're becoming. You're almost afraid to blink now. The painting isn't still anymore. It pulses in your mind's eye, rearranging itself like puzzle pieces that were always meant to shift once you knew how to look. But you don't feel paranoid. You feel invited, as if the painting has been waiting, patiently, silently, centuries of dust and glass between it and you, and still, it knew you'd come, and now, there's just one last thing to see. It begins with the green, that curtain again, so simple, so silent, and yet, it's the only organic form that doesn't obey the rules of perspective. Everything else is measured, angular, plotted, but the curtain drapes. It flows. It interrupts. It refuses to be squared into the grid, and it's been closed all this time. Why? Because behind curtains are things you're not supposed to see. In theater, it's the mechanism ropes, pulleys, levers, sweat. In temples, it's the sacred veiled gods and relics wrapped in gold. And in paintings, well, that's where things get speculative. Here's your historical fact for the night during the Renaissance. Many artists, Holbein included, dabbled in what's called trompe-l'oeil, trick of the eye. The goal wasn't just realism, it was illusion. Art designed to deceive, to blur reality, to make the painted world feel more real than the one you're standing in. But Holbein didn't just paint a trick, he housed one. In 2022, a London-based imaging team conducted deep thermal scans of the ambassadors, not just surface infrared penetrative scans, the kind used in archaeology to detect wall tombs. And beneath the left third of the canvas, behind the green curtain, they found something irregular, a shape, too angular to be a stretch frame, too consistent to be accidental warping. It's not visible on the surface. It's not part of the known underdrawing, but its geometry matches a cylinder, about the height of a forearm, and embedded within the shape, small concentric rings. The suggestion of gears, it's not confirmed. The museum didn't release the scan data, only the team's notes. Most dismissed it as canvas, repair an artifact from centuries of restoration. But you've seen too much now to ignore it. The painting's telling you something, and it's not subtle anymore. Let's go fringe again, just one more time. In a rare bookshop in Munich, a collector discovered a folio of sketches dated 1534, just 1 year after the Ambassadors was completed. Inside, drawings of strange mechanisms, annotated in a mixture of Latin and code. The author unknown, but one page stands out. It's a side view of a large wooden panel, hinged like a triptych. On the back is a narrow cylinder, tucked behind a velvet curtain. The caption beneath reads, "For those who see beyond the veil, the music of time awaits." Music of time. Doesn't that sound like a stringed instrument? Like a lute, you remember the broken string, the fractured harmony, and that eerie alignment. Someone found the spiral shadow cast at just the right angle, revealing the golden ratio. A painting tuned like an instrument. Now listen closely. There's no sound in a painting. But if this one could speak, you think it might whisper something like, "Look longer, think stranger." You're not done yet, because here's the real trick Holbein pulls, the one that makes this whole thing stick in your chest like a lodged breath. He doesn't just bend space, he bends expectation. He invites you into a world that looks, at first, like power, wealth, control, but when you linger, he shows you decay, distortion, death, and if you stay even longer, he shows you possibility. The blueprint not of machines, but a vision that arcs past his own lifetime and lands squarely in ours. You wonder, was he trying to warn us or tempt us? Or maybe he didn't know. Maybe he just painted what he saw and let history figure it out later. Maybe we're still figuring it out. Historians still argue whether Holbein embedded futuristic concepts on purpose, or whether we're just projecting backwards, seeing AI in astrolabes, reading binary in brushstrokes. But you can't shake the feeling that he knew, that he glimpsed something, an idea, a device, a future, and captured it the only way he could. Not in schematics, not in prose, but in oil and wood and shadow. And when you finally reluctantly step back from the frame, the illusion warps again. You're no longer just a viewer. You're part of it now. The room around you softens. The hum of your fan becomes the hush of candlelight. Your screen fades into lacquer. The two men in the painting seem to look not at each other, but at you, as if they've been waiting, as if you're the ambassador now of what that's for you to decide. Maybe it's truth. Maybe it's wonder. Maybe it's the quiet courage to see the world not as it's sold, but as it secretly is: complicated, coded, strange, and absolutely beautiful. And somewhere, just beyond the green curtain, the gears start turning again, just slow enough you don't quite hear them, but fast enough that when you close your eyes tonight, you'll wonder if they ever really stopped. Let's step back now. Let the curtain fall. Let the floor grow soft under your feet. The golden light of the gallery dims until you're left with only that thin outline of memory, a skull glimpsed sideways, a curtain not yet opened, a whisper beneath the paint. You did good work tonight. You didn't flinch at the strange. You didn't run from the silence. You leaned in. You lingered. You asked the harder question, not what does it mean, but why does it still matter? And in doing that, you breathed life into a painting most people pass by with a shrug, because this story wasn't just about Holbein. It was about you, your curiosity, your wonder, that beautiful ache of not knowing. So now, give your eyes a break. Let the ghosts of old pigments fade from your vision. Let the geometry dissolve into soft twilight. There's nothing more to figure out tonight. No skulls to rotate. No codes to chase. Just the slow unwind of thought. The gentle hush of a question left unanswered. Because the best stories don't tie up every thread. They leave one loose, dangling just behind the curtain, waiting for the next dreamer to tug. And that, dear listener, might just be you again. Tomorrow night, the story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.